Hi there. I just wanted to give you guys a little brief overview as to what the research process is all about. Starting a research process or a research paper for Government 300 is like a mini research paper that you would find in a journal. And it has all of the same components. It has an introduction, it has a literature review, it has a methodology section, and of course, it's going to have analysis and conclusion. So let's begin here. We want to start with thinking about the things that you're interested in. You want to figure out what it is that you're interested in, and we're going to use the Pollock test to give us some variables for us to work with. Find your dependent variable first. We're going to find a primary independent variable. We're going to think of some other independent variables as it relates to control conditions. And then we're going to go back and think about the big picture, think how we can conceptualize, and we're going to develop hypotheses. And that's how we're going to begin. So, to begin with, you have to ask yourself what you're interested in. And you need to think about the other government courses that you've taken thus far. So, for example, if you've taken a lot of international relations courses, maybe you're interested in international relations, look at those courses, look at those syllabi, look at the chapters that you were interested in, and find the questions that you were interested in. For example, maybe you were interested in why some countries are more developed, or some countries with some levels of development have greater democracy or less democracy, etc. And you can start with those original syllabi. You can find textbooks that you use. You can find readings that you use for other term papers. That's a great place to start. But once you've figured out whatever that is, I want you to then go to the Pollock Workbook. And hopefully you remember what the Pollock Workbook is. It's this book here that everyone was required to buy. In the back of the Pollock Workbook are a number of appendices. And in the fourth edition of this workbook, the appendices start on page 245. There are four appendices. The first one is the GSS, and that's only 3 pages long. Then you have one for states, which is just state-level analytic data. So state-level indicators, for example, was it a battleground state or not, the percentage of vote that Gore got in 2000, the number of cigarette packs bi-monthly per adult consumed, how conservative it is according to House delegation, etc. When you look at this Pollock book, you want to look at not only the variable name and label. If you look at the top of the pages here, you'd see at the top of the pages there are headers, and the first one is variable name and label. That's the way it's going to look in SPSS. Then it has a description of what it is. So, for example, if you look on page 248, abort law, it says under description 10 restrictions coded 0 to 1 summed. Must be performed by a licensed physician, must be performed in a hospital, second physician must participate, prohibited except in case of life and health endangerment. And so people were asked the number of these sorts of conditions that they agree with, and it in essence creates a score from 0 to 10. Anyway, so beyond that, then the next thing that you want to do is you want to look at the source and notes, because possibly the source and notes are going to give you some background as to how you can use those variables. All right, the third appendix is the appendix that starts on page 254, and that's the world, and that's world level indicators, and that's going to include things like Gini coefficients, how decentralized the country is, the year it received independence, etc. And then finally, the largest and most comprehensive database is the National Election Study Database, and that starts on page 257. The great thing about the National Election Study Database is it not only has election sort of information, but it also has a variety of, policy type questions in the American context, how people will feel about, groups or candidates. For example, there's feeling thermometers for everyone ranging from Hillary Clinton and the candidates McCain and Obama, but also thermometers for, groups within society. How do people feel about atheists? How do people feel about Muslims, etc.? All right. When you do this, you want to find your dependent variable first, and your dependent variable is what it is that you want to explain. So if, say, hypothetically, you wanted to explain why people voted for one candidate over another candidate, in the National Election Study, there's a variable called voted 2004, did someone vote? And then, let's see here. For which candidate did R vote for in the presidential primary? Voter 2004, 2008. So did they vote in both 2004, 2008, or both? How often did they vote? Um, and did you vote for person or absentee? Did you vote in the primaries, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a variety of interesting things here. Um, there's the variable for who someone voted for in 2008 is called Who08. It's on page 268, the presidential vote 2008. So if you wanted to explain why someone voted for one candidate over another, you might want to link that to something. And so what you would link it to then is an independent variable. What do you think explains it? What do you think explains why someone voted for McCain versus Obama in 2008? And you say, well, McCain's a conservative candidate and Obama's a liberal candidate, so maybe that there's something with, conservatives are more likely to vote McCain than Obama. But you need to ask yourself, does that really explain anything? Maybe more interesting is like a policy preference. The more someone supports restrictions on guns, the more likely they are to vote for the liberal candidate. And maybe there's some sort of relationship between, access to guns and voting for one candidate or another. Then you want to think about controls, right? You want to think about sources of spuriousness. Like, is there something out there that simultaneously both explains both the independent variable and the dependent variable, and it affects them both? You want to look for intervening variables, which of course get to the causal mechanism. It possibly explains why the independent variable helps explain the dependent variable. And you might want to look for conditional variables, condition under which that relationship is held to be true, and other conditions where it might not be held to be true. Having done this, having thought this process through, you want to go back and think about the big picture. What can you generalize from this form of research? If you were interested in the relationship between vote choice, well, maybe that's fairly isolated to the American context, unless you can think about what that vote choice implies. If you're thinking that a vote for Obama is a vote for a liberal candidate and a vote for McCain is a vote for a conservative candidate, then maybe that's the way you want to contextualize it. And then perhaps it's easier to say supporters of certain policy conditions or supporters of tax relief are more likely to support liberal candidates. And then you can extrapolate beyond, hopefully, the American context and think about it in other Anglo-American democracies, other democracies, etc. Finally, you're going to want to develop hypotheses. And remember, hypotheses relate to the specific relationship that you're actually testing. So, for example, you could say something like, the more someone supports gun control, the more likely they are to vote for President Obama. That would be a testable hypothesis. All right, so I think that should get you started. Make sure, remember, when you use the Pollock data set, you have to use all of your variables from one of the 4 data sets available to you. You can't go across data sets. And all of your variables have to come from one data set. So remember, once you find what it is that you're trying to explain, you have to explain it from other variables within the same data set. And those data sets are Appendix A1, A2, A3, and A4, all found in the back of this Pollock book. This thing is really going to guide you here to help you with your research. All right? So just to remind you, this is what we've covered. We've talked about, how to find your topic. You think about what you're interested in. You have to look at the Pollock book, find your dependent variable first, then find your independent variable. Think about control conditions, think big picture, think, can you conceptualize across time and across place, and think about how your variables are possibly indicators of those concepts. And then finally, at the end of this, you're going to develop some hypotheses. So good luck with this, and we look forward to getting your paper.